Okay, so this is, yeah, okay. Oh, I use this one. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this introduction, but what this is an example of, I'm not a theorist, but this is kind of empirically generated theory. And so you're going to talk about the case. It was a collusion case that I was asked to be an expert here in Australia. I'm going to talk about this case in a minute, but I wouldn't have done this but for this collusion case. But then it led to, some problems and then to some new stuff and a new way of doing backward induction we call state recursion. It's remarkably faster than time recursion, okay? And we'll explain what that is. And then after we got this new algorithm, state recursion, we realized that at least for games we call directional games, that we can actually calculate all Markov perfect equilibria with this algorithm. And it's a kind of a combinatoric algorithm. It's like we're going to be able to build them all. So it's not there's something called homotopy. You follow these paths. We're going to show you that's just remarkably bad when there's tons of equilibria, because certain paths will lead nowhere. There's loops and so I think Bertel will be showing, or Fader will be showing this, how bad a homotopy is. And so in general, we don't know of any surefire algorithm for finding all Markov perfect equilibria in any game except ours so far. So we're going to show you how this works. So we think it's not just this particular game, but there's a class of games, and we call them directional games, and we're going to show that it's kind of relevant in I/O. So that's kind of that's where we're going to go. But let's just tell the story how we got there, because I wouldn't have done this, and we wouldn't have done this without this case. Now, first of all, though, I want to go all the way back to when I was a graduate student. And well, there's this concept of Markov perfect equilibrium that Ariel has, was invented by Maskin and Tirole. Ariel has really taken this and transformed empirical I/O by using this to model how firms interact. And it's been a huge, it's probably been the biggest thing in empirical I/O since BLP. Okay. But, these are really tough. And when you have a theorist, this is a quote from Johannes Horner at Yale, and he's saying it's tough. Okay, he's saying it's a tough problem. And, when Ariel was talking in his lecture, he's saying, we try to compute these things, it's tough. Now, how do theorists do this? How do theorists find MPAs? Well, it's guess and verify, right? So you guess an equilibrium, and then you just you check that everything's a mutual best reply, right? And so if it's if it's an ordinary Nash equilibrium, it's pretty easy. When it's a Markov perfect, if you have the strategies, you plug them into Bellman equations, and then if you can show, given the other strategy, you show each Bellman equation, then you've got it. But the question is, how do you come up with those strategies in that dynamic game to then, how do you guess them? Because if you just use a bunch of Bellman equations, each Bellman equation might have a discount factor between 0 and 1, but you iterate on it, standard single agent theory says that'll converge. But when you have a system of Bellman equations, the system doesn't converge. It could be like a dog chasing its tail, right? And it can just cycle and never converge. Okay, so it's there's an algorithm in old days, fictitious play, right? And fictitious play is an example in static games playing, and if there's a mixed strategy equilibrium, fictitious play never converges as well. So so that's, Ariel has done a lot of work and pushed it forward in terms of both deterministic and stochastic algorithms, and then showing that we can do empirical I/O. And it's really, he's been working on this a long time, but really seeing the fruits of all that work and insight. Now, here's my professor for, I got my PhD in 1983 from MIT, and I took this, that's before most of you were born. So it shows how old I am. And this is my professor, Eric Maskin. Let me show you my classmates were. Tim Kehoe, David Levine, Drew Fudenberg, and John Tirole, okay? Now that is an intimidating, at the time, didn't know that, like, these guys would be getting Nobel Prizes. But I can tell you, even at that date, I was so intimidated by these guys. So Eric Maskin would assign problem sets. I don't even think he knew what the answer. He knew he had some smart students in the class, excluding me. And I think he would just ask questions he didn't even know the answer to, and they would guess and verify and hand their things in, their problem sets. And I was sitting there in the bottom basement of E52 at MIT. I was guessing, trying to verify. I know I can verify, okay? I just can't guess. So I would guess, no, guess again, no, and I was there till late at night, and these guys were running around the basement playing Dungeons and Dragons all night and giggling. And it was just so annoying. It was just so annoying. But I could see that they were just, they had this ability to guess, and you decide, I just gave up. I said, I can't do game theory. I don't know, how do you teach someone how to guess? So, you know, I actually said, I will never do I promised I would never do game theory again. But dynamic programming, I found I could do that. I took a course from Dmitry Bertsikis at MIT, and there's an algorithm. And I said, hey, I can do this. I can write a computer program, and I can find a solution with dynamic programming. Okay, so that's just a preamble. So now fast forward to 1999. And this is the Gold Coast of Australia. All right. And there's two executives, literally, this sounds like a bad joke, but there's two executives strolling on the beach. One is named Peter and the other is named Harry. And they both have their summer cottages not far from, and they're walking around dawn, and they meet each other. And it's like, Harry, Peter, Harry, you know. It turned out that they were classmates in high school, but they were also bitter corporate enemies in Australia. This is Peter. He was the managing director of Amcor, which is a cardboard company. And Harry is the CEO of Visy, which is also essentially, they call it CFP here in Australia, corrugated fiber products. We call it cardboard. And they were essentially a duopoly in Australia. So they meet on the beach, literally meet on the beach. If I had the talent of Michael Lewis, I would write a book called Collusion on the Beach and tell this story, because it's a really interesting story. They went to dinner, and they said, we really shouldn't be at each other's throat. We ought to learn to learn to play, and that's where collusion started. They had dinner. Their wives were together, they had too much to drink, and then they decided, we got to have a meeting, and they set up another meeting, and that's how the collusion started. Okay, and once it, he had to go, Peter couldn't do it all himself. He had to go up to Russell Jones, the chairman of the board, and they said, we think this is a good idea, and they knew it was illegal because they started to do it with secret meetings in bars. Okay, and they started meeting to plan out, and cardboard is standardized product, and it's sold in auctions in different, like company called Cadbury uses it. They use it to make chocolate boxes and their drinks. They use the cardboard, and they would hold auctions to get the lowest price, and they started to collude on the price in the auctions. Okay. Now, the owner of Visy is a guy named Richard Pratt. He was the fourth richest Australian. He died in 2009 of cancer. But the interesting story is these guys were definitely colluding. It was, so what happened is the lieutenants, these guys didn't meet the bars directly. They had lieutenants that would meet in the bars, and the lieutenants that would do this would often argue, and one of the guys from Amcor would wear a tape recorder, and I could listen to these tape recordings. You could hear them talking in the bars, and a typical conversation I would hear is like, bloody hell, you were supposed to win the last tender. And I'm trying to do my best Australian accent. And we need some compensation. And then the other guy says, don't get your knickers in a knot. That's Harry's fears, but don't get your knickers in a knot. Okay, you can win the next one, okay? So we were fighting, and there was cheating during the collusion, okay? And this guy, but we'll see what happened is one of the lieutenants got so disgusted, because we're going to show you in a minute, during the period of collusion from 2000 till it was blown in 2005, Vizzy, this company, the privately held company owned by this guy, its market share just steadily grew. Amcor steadily fell. And the guys from Amcor were saying, they're beating the pants up. We're supposed to be colluding and we're losing market share. They're just cheating on us left and right. And he got so disgusted that he had all these recordings, and he went and said, I'm resigning. I'm going to form my own cardboard company. And Russell Jones said, no, you're not. We have a non-compete clause. You can't leave the company. And then he pulls out his tape recorder and he said, well, I have some pretty interesting conversations here. I don't think you'd like this to be released to the press. You should let me out of the non-compete clause. And at that point, they huddled and they did the right thing. They turned, there's a whistleblower law in Australia. They turned themselves into the ACCC, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. And under leniency, they showed the tape recordings. And but when they approached Pratt had a very ingenious defense. He said, we weren't colluding. We were only pretending to collude. We were trying to make these dumb buggers think that we were colluding. We're just fooling them. Well, they had, that was a lie, and he would have, he would have gone to jail because he was lying under oath. Except he died before they could throw him in jail. So that's the story. Now, how did I get involved in this? Well, I was hired as an economic expert to calculate damages. So the first company that sued, so after there's criminal damages, but there's civil damages in Australia, where the companies that are harmed by the collusion can sue to get back the damage. So you have to, so the economic expert is you have to calculate the but-for price of cardboard. So we've given data, and the economic expert has to say, what would the price have been but for the collusion in Australia? So that's where Markov perfect equilibrium and competitive analysis comes in. Now, one of the interesting things is I'm an American, and in America, the economists who are experts in these cases are just like little puppets by the lawyers. The lawyers tell them what to say, what to do, what to think, and you just do, but you get paid like the best ones $1,000 an hour for doing it. So this is like a real racket in America. What I like about Australia is that when you're hired as an expert, the lawyers here can't tell you what to think at all. You are an expert hired by the Federal Court of Australia, and you call the shots. And that's refreshing to really be an expert where someone listens to you. But it's a big responsibility. So I remember I flew into Melbourne the first time, and instead of being able to digest all the information, I went into this room on the 50th floor of a big skyscraper overlooking Melbourne Bay. And there's all these boxes, and I was really tired and jet lagged. And I remember they were just pouring espresso after espresso so I could stay awake. And there was just literally a room about this big, and there was boxes of documents piled this high. And they didn't tell me where to start. I was just supposed to look through. I mean, there's thousands of documents. And so literally, almost by random, I just started kind of picking out things, and there were like copies of emails. And then I went to one box in the middle, and I picked out a thicker memo from 1997. And I was really lucky to have picked that up, because what did this memo say? It was a document by the board of directors by Amcor of an investment they had planned to take. Now, let me give you some context. This thing was my smoking gun. It was this one document that led me to the theory of what would happen but for the collusion. Now, here is Amcor. This document I got was a memo. They were planning, this is in 1997. Remember, they met on the beach in 1999. They have this old paper mill. So what is cardboard made of? It's made of paper. And they grind up it's called kraft, trees. They grind up the fibers and they mix it with recycled paper to make the cardboard. And this old plant, some of it goes back to the 40s, and it was tremendously inefficient, was high cost, and they could replace this whole plant with this new plant called B9 that would be way more energy, would pollute less. This is in what's called Botany Bay. If you fly into Sydney, you can actually see this plant as you fly in and land in the Sydney at the airport. And, you know, so I noticed when I landed in Sydney, I could see the plant, I could see this. And this new B9 was finally made, but only in 2014. But it was supposed to be done, you know, 1998, 1999. And they had really good, like they had industrial spies. This was going to leapfrog, this new plant was, they estimated the internal rate of return because they knew the marginal cost of Vizzi's production capabilities. And they estimated how long it would be before Vizzi would leapfrog them with their own kind of equivalent of a B9. But they said, we'll have long enough time before they will come in that we can make a really good, like a 15% internal rate of return on this investment. So it was like a really cool document, right? Where they had engineers and really long, and it just sounded like this is a great investment project. So then I'm saying, wow, that's what they're planning. But then they meet on the beach, and then I'm saying, well, why did they ever do B9? B9 got dropped. And then I'm looking through all the other boxes. What, you know, any other board member? There was no discussion of after 1999. Suddenly, B9 is no more to be heard from. And I'm saying, that's really strange. They start to collude, and then they drop B9. And I said, there's where, this is where I go back to Eric Maskin. That's where John Russ starts to become a game theorist, to say, guess and verify. I'm guessing this is going to be a leapfrogging equilibrium. And this was going to be an investment where they're going to leapfrog Vizzi for a certain amount of time until Vizzi leapfrogs them. And then I say, hey, this is a beautiful way to prove the damages, because they know, I have this memo, they know the marginal cost of Vizzi. If they beat this, this is lower marginal cost, so it's Bertrand price competition. The after B9 would have come in, but for it, the price of cardboard would have been on the marginal cost of Vizzi. Bam, I have got my case. Okay. And I was really, really excited. Okay. And in fact, the argument carried the day. We wrote up a memo. We came up with the damages, and I flew down like 6 months later to Melbourne. It was going to go into court. And I was really looking forward to it because I was going to get testimony experience. Now, when you get to see an expert, just writing a report doesn't make you Top Gun. You have to actually get testimony experience. And when you get testimony experience, your market value in the US or anywhere just goes way, way up, right? But until you have testimony experience, it's like they just don't trust. I was so eager to go in and testify to the judge. And 5 minutes before the trial was to start, an announcement, there's an out of court settlement. And they settled 5 minutes. This actually, I guess if you're an expert, this happens frequently, that you're waiting right to the last minute and there's a settlement made. And it was an undisclosed amount that Amcor paid to Cadbury, but it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay, now here's the theory then. The theory is intuitive. Leapfrogging, they have this old inefficient plant. They're going to spend $500 million. And, it was actually eventually, at the time it was $500 million, the largest single investment in their 144 history, the largest and most innovative recycled paper machine of its kind in Australia. 330 meters long, 22 meters high, produces 1.6 kilometers of paper per minute and reduces water consumption by 26%, energy use by 34%, and the amount of waste sent to landfill by 75%. Now, there's a social harm to collusion right there, right? That if you think this collusion delayed this plant, the pollution into the excess energy usage, there's a real social cost, but you can't, the fish in the Botany Bay can't sue Amcor and Vizzi for that. In fact, even the consumers, this is a gap in Australian law. The consumers were presumably harmed ultimately because they passed it through. So the firms could sue. And then it came, Fader was involved in another case with all the mango growers that use cardboard. And the defense was that these producers were just going to pass, they got a higher price of cardboard, but they could just raise their price and pass it on to the consumers. And then there would be no damages because the firms were just passing on a higher cost, right? And, I think we won on that too, right? Because some of the firms will sell to Kohl's, right? If you're a mango producer, Kohl's is like, an oligopsonist. You can't necessarily pass it on. So Fader and I got enough data to show that some of these small producers, they did get squeezed, but the consumers are really there was never any damages to consumers in Australia, as far as I know. Okay, now, so the plant gets abandoned. Now, here's the theory then. Why? First of all, you have to justify Bertrand pricing. Cardboard is cardboard. It's not like Pepsi and Coke even. It's whatever is the best cardboard at the cheapest price. Now, cardboard is cardboard, so it's not best cardboard. It's just the cheapest kind of cardboard that you can buy. And if you think about how cardboard is, there's a machine called a corrugator. So we're going to say it's kind of constant returns to scale, because what you see is that you get the paper from B9 or Vizzi's paper plants. There's a roll of paper. And then you got kind of three papers, right? There's inside one that crinkles it, some glue is sprayed, and then there's two outside pieces in the crinkled paper. That's the cardboard, and then it gets rolled up. And, if you don't have enough capacity in this machine, go through that door, there's another bay and there's another machine. You can run these 24 hours a day. So we said, to first approximation, this is constant returns to scale. There's a marginal cost of producing this stuff. Now, the other thing of note, though, is this machine is made somewhere like Czechoslovakia and Germany. When Amcor and Vizzy don't do R&D, they just buy technologies out there, and it's just an adoption decision. So if it's like Intel, they're really doing R&D continuous. So Ariel's models, there's a continuous investment choice. Here, if we can just think about it, is do B9 or not, or adopt that machine or not. So it makes it easier to think about. So we have these, it's a cost reducing investment, a classic cost reducing investment. So I think I'm going to, not bore you with too many more details, but when Amcor did, just the threat of this, investment before it was shelved led to a price war, before 1999. That's why there was really interesting collusion, because they were trying to line up enough. Amcor was anticipating B9 and they wanted to steal business customers. So they were price undercutting them before they even did B9 to get them there so they could ramp up production and have loyal things. And there was this big price war, and then that led to the collusion. So everything seemed to fit together. Now, let me just say, I want to say a few things about the defense. This is interesting. When if you're going to be an economic consultant, I think you've done this too, Ariel, right? You get attacked. They make you sound like a dummy. So if, I would never say I was a flunky in Maskin's class. You wouldn't want to say that on the stand, right? Because then it would come back to just, Professor Rust, isn't it true that you said you're a flunky and you got a B- in Eric Maskin's class at MIT, right? So, and then the other things, they didn't say that, fortunately, but they, the defense said, they had this really innovative defense. They said, the damages are still zero, because even though they explicitly colluded, they could have tacitly colluded. They could have just did this mind game and achieved the same outcome as explicit collusion. And so then we had to defend against that argument, right? So that's, one of the arguments they actually made. Now, the question is, the first thing you say, well, if they could have tacitly colluded, and tacit collusion is just a mind game, it's legal. It's when you actually meet and share information that's illegal. Why would anyone ever explicitly, if you could get all their gains, then why would there be any prosecutions for collusion? Okay, and the answer is that tacit collusion is not easy. In fact, there's very few examples of it. Now, in fact, I don't know, you know the literature better than I do. There was Brezhnev. I think you have to go all the way back to Brezhnev. He has a paper called Competition and Collusion in the American Automobile, the 1950. That's when I was born. Okay, if that's the best evidence, you have to go way back to 1955 to find an example of tacit collusion. Wow, so then there's a whole bunch. Well, first of all, there's a guy named David Rapson too, who reanalyzed Brezhnev using BLP and found that with a more flexible demand system, that he could not reject a Bertrand equilibrium in the price with a BLP demand system. So, he rejected collusion in favor of just competition, but with using a better demand system. Now, and then you can look at all these experiments. There's like a meta study of tacit collusion, 500 experiments. And what you find is generally, you just can't support tacit collusion in experimental labs. So here's an example. Like here, one of the things they do is they put a price ceiling on this. So the 28 is the price ceiling. There's a price ceiling here, okay? And then the idea is that could be a focal point for collusion. And so here in the lab, they have this price ceiling, but then they remove it and set it up high. And when it's removed, there's an initial blip, like people feel like they can go up higher, but then the prices converge. So the Bertrand price is 21. And you see most of the time, even when there's this ceiling here, which they could say, why don't they just go to the price ceiling and collude on that? You just don't see it. You see Bertrand pricing, marginal cost pricing, much better approximation for what you see. And then, this is experiments where you show you really, if you don't have explicit collusion, talk and no talk, that this is, and then the number, but even when you have, when you have more than two people, you just see a breakdown. There's too hard to coordinate when you're talking with 8 parties, right? And I think, Nick, you studied lysine cartel, right? There was a lot of cheating on that, right? And there was many parties in the Archer-Daniel ADM cartel, right? So, so in other words, and then, we talked about cheating. This is the market share of Ancor and Visi during the period they colluded. Here's 1999 meeting on the beach. And then the collusion breaks down in 2005. And look what happens to market shares. Systematic cheating. So, basically, I think with that kind of evidence, we could, this idea of tacit collusion is sustainable is kind of dumb. Yeah. So, David Rapson, I just checked his website. I don't know, he never published it, but I asked him, why didn't you publish? Because I think it's a great paper to revisit Brezhnev. And I don't know why it hasn't finally come out, but I do have the working paper version. And then Nick's work that was your thesis at Yale, right? The ADM, and basically this is quoting from Nick. There's these theories, the theorists Crampton and Palfrey, that there's efficient collusion is attainable in which the lowest cost firm is allocated full production, and then the monopoly price is set. So you might say that's a little bit like Amcor and Visi. They jettison B9. Don't do that investment, but just, you might say, well, they're allocating more production to Visi with side payments, and Visi's it's the lower cost producer. But in fact, there wasn't any side payments. They were just being cheated on and losing market share. And so, Nick points out that there's a bargaining problem, and that bargaining problem in saying who gets what in when you collude is itself a really hard problem to solve. And that partly brought down the ADM cartel, right? Those disagreements. So, all right. So I'm going to conclude here with the Bertrand investment paradox. Now, the other criticism is, okay, John, you haven't gotten your game theory right, because if it's Bertrand competition, and Visi could also go out and buy this technology, B9, he could have an equivalent B9. So why would Amcor, and if they both have the marginal cost, what do we know about Bertrand price competition? Both firms set price equal to marginal cost, they get zero profit. So why would you invest if your opponent could invest We both lay out some costs and we both have equal marginal cost of production, zero profit. So how do you explain why there should be any investment in this world? Well, the idea is that there should be endogenous coordination. That's leapfrogging. I move first. I'm going to be price leader, low cost leader for a little while. Then the other guy jumps, and then they're the lowest cost leader. So I get a period of I'm the low cost, I get profits that justifies my investment, and then the other guy goes in. So that's where I'm guessing. So we were able to fend off all these arguments. Now, here's where Fader and Bertle come in. I come back after the case is done, very happy. But I thought, you know what? I should just check that this is actually an equilibrium. So I'm doing what I was teaching this grad course at the University of Maryland at the time. And I thought, I'm going to assign this as a problem set. And I wrote down the Bellman equations for the firms and I assigned it to my students, just like Eric Maskin, right? I didn't know the answer. So I was going to copy Eric Maskin. I'm going to let the students, I say, here's the Bellman equations. I want you to program this up and then simulate. And let's see if we get leapfrogging here. And and I showed them how to do it the Ariel's way. You assume a symmetric equilibrium. So instead of two value functions, there's really only one value function in a symmetric equilibrium. And the students then went out and they programmed it up. And I get back and they see simulations, and I'm seeing leapfrogging, and I say, all right, my intuition was correct. But then I tried to program it myself, and I said, I want to see, I just want to double check. And when I tried to program it, the value functions were never converging. I was doing backward induction, and they were like chasing each other, and they were oscillating up and down. I was not getting convergence of the Bellman equations. But that if you just stop it somewhere and then simulate it, of course, you're going to get leapfrogging. But I hadn't, and then I started to get worried. And I thought, and these students, they handed in results. They didn't mention that their Bellman equations were not converging. And then I had to give a talk at Columbia where this guy, Michael Reardon, is a brilliant theorist. And I give this talk about this case, and he hands me this little paper that he did in Journal of Industrial Economics in 1994, which kind of said that leapfrogging can't happen. His paper with Reardon and Salat says that the only equilibrium is preemption. So there's one firm that is constantly investing in equilibrium, and the other firm always stays out. And it's also a really terrible equilibrium because it's called rent dissipating equilibrium. The preempting firm invests all the time, but so fast to keep out the other firm that the firm that's investing gets zero expected profits too. Both firms get no profits in equal. The one that stays out gets zero profit, and the other one's investing furiously to preempt the other one also gets zero profits. And they said that's their conjecture of the general outcome, no leapfrogging. So then, fortunately, I met Bertle and Fader, and I'm going to let them take it over. We worked together to solve this puzzle, and I was very scared for a while until these guys came in. So I'll stop there.